In 1955, the conflict of the Vietnam War pushed people to speak out. Because their voices individually were not heard, they compromised by making music, not only to inspire themselves but the people of the nation. This is what is known as the musical movement. Near the end of the 1950s, the U.S. Army gradually got pulled into an all-out shooting war with the North Vietnamese. In 1959, the military was given permission to fire back if fired upon. In the year 1969, there was approximately 543,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. The main reason why the U.S. joined the war in Vietnam was because they were attempting to prevent the spread of communism in the world. Because of the U.S. presence in Vietnam, people started to speak out against the war. The protests started among small groups of peace activists and leftist intellectuals on college campuses. It gained national premise in 1965 after the United States bombed North Vietnam. Not only were students and people in the community protesting the war, but so were the musicians of the time. This is what is referred to as the musical movement, or musical protests.
Artists such as Bob Dylan, Phil Ochoa, Barry McGuire, Tom Paxton, and many others. At first, though, some of the artists did not mean to be seen as a symbol in the protesting community, such as the artist Bob Dylan. One of the songs that got great recognition as a protest song was Blowin' in the Wind, which he performed a partially written version of in 1962 at Greenwich Village. Was never intended to become a protest song, but even after he announced to the crowd, "This here ain't no protest song," or anything like that, 'cause I don't write no protest songs, ended up possibly becoming one of the most famous protest songs ever.
Even though the song was never originally meant to be a protest song, the words are still very powerful, and because of the words in his song, people could easily assume he's speaking of the men in the war. Although he never intended to make this a protest song, the words that he sings make it stand out to the protesters of the time, and it became very popular in that community.
Now, unlike Bob Dylan, there are artists that purposely tried to get the anti-war word out, like artist John Lennon, a former Beatles member. His song, "Give Peace a Chance," was inspiring to many people, and he even talked out about the war after making this song and many others.
He originally wrote this song with his first wife, Yoko Ono. You often see her in interviews with him at the time of the war. They both had an anti-war opinion and wanted to inspire other people through music and speaking out that they should also fight against the war. This song was very popular and widespread.
In an interview, John Lennon talks about how he believed that peace should not just be a now thing, that peace should be a forever thing, and that the people of the time did not realize that they have the power, and that they all need to come together and show that they as the people have the power.
Every country's had a violent revolution for one reason or the other. Not one of them has the freedom we're all talking about. So we're saying give peace a chance, like nobody's ever done it before. And it's not a matter of, we're not thinking in terms of 10 years, we're thinking in terms of peace forever, and everybody's talking about now. I want peace now. We can get peace now if we want it now. And the left wing talk about giving the power to the people. Anybody knows that the people have the power. All we have to do is awaken the power in the people. The people are unaware. It's like they're not educated to realize that they have power. They put the politicians in power. They vote for the local mayor. The people do it. But the system is so geared that everybody believes that just the father will fix everything. The father being the government. government will fix everything. It is all government's fault. You know, shake your fist at the government. Well, we are the government. The people are the government, and the people have the power, but we must try and make them aware of this.
In 1956, another artist by the name of Phil Ocha created and sung a song called Draft Dodger. The whole song was the story of a young man trying to avoid the draft system into the war. This song was one of the first anti-war songs to use comical overtones and was very popular with the anti-war movements.
I've got eyes like a bat and my feet are flat and my asthma's getting worse. Yes, think of my career, my sweetheart dear, my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm a-going to school and I'm a-working in a defense plant. I got a dislocated disc and a racked up back, I'm allergic to flowers and bugs. And when the bombshell hits, I get epileptic fits and I'm addicted to 1,000 drugs. I got the weakness woes, I can't touch my toes, I can hardly reach my knees. And if the enemy came close to me, oh, I'd probably start to sneeze. I'm only 18, got a ruptured spleen, and I always carry a purse. I've got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, my asthma's getting worse.
The character of the young boy in the song starts by talking about how patriotic he is, but that he, along with other draftees, is scared and does not want the war to be the last thing that he does with his life.
Oftentimes, people forget about the families of the soldiers in the war, and how they coped with their sons, daughters, husbands, or wives fighting. Jean Marie Coker, a 94-year-old mother, featured in Ken Burns' documentary, speaks of her feelings towards her son joining and also losing him in the war.
In the fall of '64, Denton was 17, and he was determined to go into the service.
Mogi Crocker had been restless since the summer. After the Gulf of Tonkin incident, he had confided to his sister that he wanted to join the Navy, but he knew his parents would not sign the consent form that would have allowed a 17-year-old to enlist.
He was talking about wanting to go into the service, and that his attempts to go underage had failed, and that he wanted my parents to support him in that.
His parents tried to persuade him that he could be more useful to his country with a college education than as just another private. Mogi was adamant.
Monday morning he left for school, and I watched him leave. But that night he didn't come in for supper, and he hadn't called. The day that my brother ran away has to be one of the most bizarre experiences in my life. I eventually happened to look in my piggy bank, and he had taken the money I had and left a note for me. He had promised he would pay me back. He was gone about 4 months and said that he would not come home unless we agreed to sign for him. And he wouldn't be 18 until June. But we did agree, and he did come home. My husband felt it was an honor-bound agreement. I was hoping that I could change his mind.
These are just some of the many songs and people that spoke out about the war. Not all songs were necessarily against the war. There are many that tell the story of people in the war or the opinions of people that were pro-war. The whole nation was divided in its view on the war, and music was just one of the many outlets people had. There were many protests and people speaking out, even if their voices were not all heard. At least they could compromise through music.